I am going to, as I would suggest you do, have the reference sheet of transition words and phrases up, as well as my outline. And when I go to the part of the outline, I'm gonna start adding to. I'm going to read aloud and say, because I think reading aloud helps you sort of like see what's missing and see what you need to connect. And as I go to connect each idea, I'm going to think, what is the relationship between them, and choose a transition. Okay, so it starts with: the success of the LGBTQ movement is far from the only example of power of using the court system to advance social change. They've also been used effectively. I'm going to change this to the courts have also been used effectively to give people accused of crimes more rights. So I added this sentence to sort of the original topic sentence that was there, because these two both of these examples are connected to that same idea. If these were unrelated examples, they're really different, it'd be fine to just keep the first one, but this signals more for the reader what's coming next. So the courts have also been used effectively to give people accused of crimes more rights. My next part says, in 1963 in Florida, Claire Earl Gideon was accused of a crime. I know that this, really all of this, is an example of the courts being used to give people accused of crimes more rights. Thus, I'm going to look at to signal an example. And in this case, I'm actually going to keep it really simple and just say, for example, in 1963 in Florida, Clarence Earl Gideon, his name is so hard for me to say, was accused of a crime. I'm also going to, now that I've added that, and I would suggest you do the same, delete the bullet point and delete the thing that says evidence, so it shows my progress going along and I know what part I've already worked through and which parts I still have to. So then it says, when he was sent to jail, he sued, saying it was not fair because it was not a fair trial because he couldn't afford a lawyer. Actually, this sort of already has a transition, and the relationship is clear between those ideas, so I'm actually not going to add one there. And you may have times where you don't really need it. You read it and you're like, oh, that sounds fine already. So I'm just going to add that one. Okay, what's next? The case called Gideon v. Wainwright made its way to the Supreme Court. Okay, I think that happened after, like later in time than when he sued, right? If it made its way to the Supreme Court. So I'm going to go up here to time and sequence, and I'm going to say, I like the word subsequently actually a lot. And if subsequently the case called Gideon versus Wainwright made its way to the Supreme Court. Sounds all right, but I can also actually think about if I want to add it later in the sentence, and I think in this case I do. The case called Gideon v. Wainwright subsequently made its way to the Supreme Court. That sounds better to me actually, because this one I'm sort of just describing, and then I'm saying this part is the thing that actually happened next. Subsequently made its way to the Supreme Court. They ruled, that seems abrupt. They ruled in Gideon's favor, declaring that the option to be represented by a lawyer was an essential part of a trial. I think it's the same relationship. Again, it's order, sequence, like time. So I'm going to say, I'm going to change this to, ultimately, the court ruled in Gideon's favor. I got this from this section. Declaring that the option to be represented by a lawyer was an essential part of a free trial. See how much better that sounds? Now I know that I'm telling a story. I'm saying one thing, then another thing, then another thing. And I know as I move to the next thing that I'm no longer adding events, but we'll say that in a sec. So ultimately the court ruled in Gideon's favor, declaring that the option to be represented by a lawyer was an essential part of a fair trial. If a defendant cannot afford a lawyer, it's the obligation of the state to provide one for them. Okay, I definitely need a transition, but I'm a little confused here because I sort of, when I look at this list, I feel like I'm adding an idea, but I also feel like I'm showing results. And the reason I'm pointing out that I'm confused here is that this might happen to you. It's not always super straightforward. And sometimes the cool thing is there's more than one right answer. So if I tried one to signal addition of ideas, what if I said, further, if a defendant cannot afford a lawyer, it's the obligation of the state to provide one for them. That sounds all right. But if I say, hence, to show results, if a defendant can't afford a lawyer, it's the obligation of a state to provide one for them. Actually, both of those sound absolutely appropriate, and it is sort of like tricky sometimes like that, but you really just plug it in and choose which one you think sounds best. In this case, they both sound all right. I never use the word hence, so I'm going to use it this time. And if you're really unclear, you can leave me a comment and be like, I don't know if this makes sense. And I will give you feedback on it. Or when I give you feedback, I will address the comment, okay? And that's really all you're gonna do throughout. You're just thinking, pausing repeatedly as you go, what is the relationship between these ideas?